Pleased to see you again. So we're now in week 3, and actually we are now cloning within the discipline of law and public policy. So in some aspect you will encounter difficulties since we have some mixed nature of review between the Constitution and administrative law, along with the public policies, I can see. Often the Constitution and administrative law are providing a structure and crucial rigidities in interplay, and also kind of a dynamism that the tripartite government pursued to realize the will of public and also many public goods. Of course, it is actually not easy to define in any accurate terms about a public good or others. It is controversial and could be contended on agenda by agenda basis. So you see, in this class, you will be furthered on a broad reach of administrative action and power, and also shortcomings of regulatory government. So we will consider the difficulties of goal attainment. There are causes and reasons for a ineffective administration, and some dilemma that the modern administrator is exclusively faced with. How do you see the context? You see, also we'll continue to explore setting the stage for the study of administrative law. And in next projection, you will be introduced to the scope and purpose of week 3. We begin to explore the origins and meaning about administrative law. What is law? That is actually important question in terms of jurisprudence and your basic legal codes in this department. It actually requires a method of classes, perhaps cover one term in sequence and structure. However, that would be dealt as brief to serve this class purpose. We would see in 4 sets in basics, which encompasses case laws and a statute and the Constitution and regulatory laws. Of course, the preserve of regulatory laws, as in this concern, would represent, signify the typicals of this class dealing. So the administrative agencies assumed important role about rulemaking. So they are also quasi-legislative in that sense, and we will take a brief look at that element. And also we will overview the development of administrative law. And that discussion would resemble in forms. However, in some essences, we could derive some insights in understanding the history of administrative law. In our concern, you will find the APA, the term to denote the notable statute, to be concerned of administrative dealings, you see. So that statute enacted earlier in the last century are governing norms in general nature about adjudication and rule making and discretion of administration, as well as a final the judicial review in final touch. So you mind and basic disposition about administrative need to be centered on the concept. In later next class, you also be introduced some key provision to define the public administration in terms of this statute. So, for example, you will grasp some basic formality between law and public policy. Law would be a clause. Would be a globe to shroud our human hands. Then what are human hands? Do you see properly the context of a administrative action or in public intervention for social justice? How do you consider the globe? You see, the piecemeal statutes actually not comprehensive, but often we consider the administrative genre would be developed in remarked fashion, as you can see in the last class, for many public programs and extensive interplay between Congress and administration had been witnessed, you see. And the non-delegation doctrine would well be corroded in the context. Now, the administration plays an important role to govern the social and economic justice, you see. So we revert to the previous concerns, you see. Actually, the need about a broad reach of administrative action of power might be provoked by the market of failure, as we have comment from scholars and others. What is market failure? So actually, the theory is idealistic from Adam Smith and Ricardo in the International Division of Labor. So we could be receive a good lesson. However, the market will not succeed or fail in the abstract, such as abstract. There are scope of realities or contingencies to be addressed by the government and state, and also the current context of international economy and the regime to manage the phenomena would not be separable from that purview, you see. So the government failure, as I said, also in other aspect we encountered in earlier ages of last centuries. So the players be tripled, you see, the international regime, national government, and enterprises. In the early centuries, perhaps the 18th or 17th, the capitalist paradigm could well flourish, you see. And well-educated and industrious people are very good actor to boost the materialistic accumulation and also the production mode is fairly operating. Notwithstanding some very limited context of anomalies. That is not the case. We consider in more recent years, end of 19th centuries and early of 20th centuries, you see. So you now well know the imperfection of society was actually the failure market and others. How to restore a social or economic justice, about that degradation in some aspect. How do you consider? And also we believe that there is some political strand or aspect in requiring the growth of an administrative state. The paradigm would provide a good chance about a growth of a democratic participation. You see, for example, the racist minorities of race or a female class will not be plenary as in this contemporary times. They will suffer no suffrage right, actually, no right to participate in politics, and also they could experience discrimination socially or in some cases institutionally. It's actually harsh. And that context of social injustice and failure about equal protection of laws would also create the circumstances that the administrative action should be forefronted to address social evils and injustice. You see, the context of a oligopoly or monopolist power would one side to promote the growth of the administrative state, you see. And also we have some important environment to require the administrative action or public intervention in a more serious way, you see. Now the advancement of technology is very stark, you see. You consider that means the public protection of public interest need to be ensured against any fallacy or miscarriage of a private sector. For example, Federal Drug Administration is one of important branch nowadays to administer the increase of public health standard would be reviewed and enforced to regulate the industries, private industries, and also they are in collaboration of research institute or universities. You may hear of a NIH, what is that organ? So National Institute of Health in the United States plays an important role to increase the research discoveries, and even they administer research ethics standard. As you will see later in the next class, the Administrative Procedure Act would provide the kind of a key concept in terms of a administrative law. You see, they are expected to act on information and participation and accountability. What is information? That represents our understanding about a science and prerequisite to create a scientific knowledge. And the mind of bureaucrats or public officers should be substantial to search for a scientific truth. That is one cause we consider to charge the administrative branch as a public defender in this technological period. And they also are based on a professionalism, and the smack of a professionalism could well be identified within the preserve of the administrative branch, you see. We consider, therefore, the backdrop of why the regulatory government or administrative state should emerge. What is not a judiciary, for example? Why is not Congress? One reason could be given that people of Congress would be ombuds people. Their prime role would be political, to communicate the context of politics and the story of the ideas of a constitutionship, for example, and nation, and also could be reconciled with a political constituents, and also they lead the public opinion to push forward the goals of a locale or nation, the electoral parish, the kind. So what is a public interest? The basic negotiation or communicative process could be practiced. However, that could not be a substance in some level of a complicacies. So in the face of that dimension, they often prefer to delegate the power or rule-making authority may be assigned to cover the story, and also the shape of public response against the public issues and problems. So the administrative branch could well be seen as appropriate and proper to undertake that responsibility. Then why is not the judiciary? Judicial personnel of judicial branch or now entertains a lifetime tenure in a federal context, and some limited scope in state government. You see now, suppose 3 or 4 states now incorporate the lifetime tenure scheme for the state judges. And they are also required to be aloof and neutral. So they often prefer to sustain the law itself. They are actually judicious and firmly rooted in law and constitution, statute, and case law. They also need to act in respect in respecting a precedent. They have to respect the precedent, and it's kind of a tradition and a form practice long evolved of history. So the rule of stare decisis is very absolute governing in theory and as a matter of tradition. So. And one interesting research also corroborates with our sensibility that the justices of Supreme Court are not acting from a political policy preferences. They actually are responsible to deliver a judicial justice. So they are ground on a case of controversy requirement as set forth in the United States Constitution. And they are expected to respect the separation of powers principle, which is very well respected, as you see, and they, in other type of strengths, practice a judicial restraint. That means they are very passive. Actually, we often attribute the nature branch as passive, and they could well be defined as conservative among the three branches in the constitutional scheme. So we call the first and second branches of government as political. So they are political branch, and often they have advocate the idea of progressivism or and social injustice could be pursued, and they are expected to mobilize the political consensus to wheel ahead the society. So the executive branch and also Congress. So that is the point in contrast some aspect. So we may arrive at some insight that the judicial branch is the most appropriate institution to execute this important job in this contemporary times. So the free market shortcomings are very notorious in last century, and is should surprise a reader familiar with basic economics. Three other and deeper dimensions to the free market problem, however, may not be so obvious or familiar. As commented, in the United States, the administrative process plays a major role because of increasing technological complexity. And we now see other market shortcomings also deserve some explanation. Because free markets seem in economic history to go through boom and bust business cycles, modern government takes administrative steps to smooth the cycles out. Most modern central banking regulations, to say nothing of the monetary and fiscal policies, exist for this purpose alone. Furthermore, free markets have no mechanism that requires producers of goods to pay for the indirect cost of production, for example, the cost imposed by air and water pollution. There is no incentive to control pollution because producers can sell a product for less if they do not have to recover pollution control costs as part of the selling price of their products. Hence, the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency. And you also see some difficult, the kind of puzzles we receive in sensibility, the dynamism of a economy and within the market became increasingly complex, very complex, very not amenable to easy grasp of layperson. So they trade the interest to each other. And the government is actually ultimately responsible to the national economy. So intertwined in complicacies and also very symbiotic indeed, to push ahead the economic need to survive, very healthy, and prosperity and subsistence on the other hand could well be in the hands of government. So what is that? For example, the government now is responsible to administer the public pension program, for example, social welfare benefit, a disability benefit, the kind of a dereliction or manipulation, was kind of price polarization in the early stage. So in the next class, I suppose you will be exposed to three notable illustrations about due process concept. So administrative branch is actually prime engine to intervene, or in some cases manipulate the direction of the national economy. And how do you consider the production and consumer side? You will be given three illustrations about due process concept. The first case will show the earlier stage of public intervention about the stockyards operation. In that case, stockyards operator allegedly manipulate the increase of price to be condemned by the department, and so the aggrieved party, in this case, is stock yard operators, brought that controversy to the court law. So it was disputed in court about the process. Is it due, or is it permissible in terms of due process concept? So they could afford all due process. Actually, we often see the essence of rule, the opportunity to be heard about infraction or the alleged loss from government action or others. So the case may be involved with a dismissal of professors in state university. In this case, they were sanctioned and denied the management decision. So the court actually sustained the plaintiff side, in this case a stockyards operator. So the regulatory scheme actually was executed in unsatisfactory manner. You can see that. So due process required to be afforded as a matter of constitutional law was deprived and lacking or insufficient to make the regulative disposition imperative. And the other case, entitled Goldberg, is actually a very notorious case which pioneers the concept of a due process. So what is a due process that has to be afforded for the deprived party, aggrieved parties? They may be divested of their entitlements, social welfare, and must suffer a harsh condition of living if the law could be sustained, for example. So they need to have opportunity to be heard and debate the decision. Is it permissible in terms of constitutional and statute? In this context, you consider two aspects of due process concept. And in terms of administrative law and public policy, the procedural due process is actually very important in comparison with a substantive concept of due process. So liberty or inalienable private interest has to be ensured as a matter of constitution, equal protection, and also the right to privacy, and how about right to decent housing? We consider generation of a constitutional laws as in the frames of in the framework of United Nations and others. Second generation, fourth generation, the substantive due process perhaps would be in match and fit with the fourth generation, particularly the kind of a liberty interest, which is fundamental and that could not be contravened or infringed upon. The procedural due process requires a due process about deprivation of a private interest. So in some cases, the court may mandate as constitutional that more intricacies of administrative hearing would be safeguarded if to satisfy the procedural due process. In other case, that would not be required. So a concise form of a hearing procedure may be afforded constitutionally and could not be invalidated in due process requirement. So it then we consider the issue would come as weighing or comparing about the severity of cases, the extent of deprivation about private interest, and also the context of a justice realizable. A strictly evidence hearing would only could resolve the case properly without harming any constitutional mandate. Then that should be an errand to be imposed upon the administrative branch. And also we consider, importantly, the financial burden on the administrative branch. If weighted process would be forged, then that could not be expanded in due context about short of a fiscal capabilities. So points and elements need to be visited to weigh if the process could be constitutionally permissible or endorsable. That concept would be explored later in this class, involving three important cases. Then we'll consider the fourth and fifth theme to finalize the first and second weeks. I've commented about a political context of a modern administrative state. So two stories are pertinent to introduce you the lacking of a administrative institution, about failure of a policing state. You see the Mississippi, state of Mississippi, located in the middle of a U.S. continent, and one suffered from some racial discrimination and impermissible action and intervention of a public authority, a government. And they also unravel the stories from actors from Mississippi on a black, and also some news articles. So how do you see as a harshness? And it's actually very oppressive to stir the public. Let me give you some of them as verbatim from Kevin Sack, Mississippi Reveals Dark Secrets of a Racist Time. It was in Jackson, Mississippi, March 17th. After 21-year court fight, the state of Mississippi today unsealed more than 12,000 pages of secret files from a state agency that use spy tactics, intimidation, forced imprisonment, jury tampering, and other illegal methods to thwart the activities of civil rights workers during 1950s, 60s, and early 70s. So, what is his name? Sorrow. Have you known the figure? Actually, who is transcendentalist and critic of a U.S. society in the last century, and also one activist to advocate anti-racism. Reverend Martin Luther King. What is a social, a legal justice in deep preserve of jurisprudence? So they return to early days of Socrates. Do you consider it complies with our sense of justice? Socrates actually gladly received the poison delivered by state authority. he declared in conscience the gratitude of a state, which could be well compared with the parental support, though he said he was educated by state, and also the same extent in role to breed himself. So I'm glad to die. How do you consider? What is the law is kind of promise. The social members have to respect the laws and obey the laws. How do you consider the natural laws? The legal positive. The argument between legal positivism and natural law theory is notable, as you learn in law class. Fundamental about juridical philosophies. And also, how do you see the case of Gandhi? So, important figure to advance the inalienable concept of justice in modern times. Like an air journey into shadow past, the files of the agency, the Mississippi State Sovereignty Commission, provided a profoundly unsettling reminder of the state's determination to maintain Jim Crow segregation, as reporters and individuals named in the Commission's files began to review the computerized records. While some of the Commission's methods have been known for years, the full files released today demonstrated the scope of its work. Investigators made note of the skin color, associations, religious beliefs, and sexual proclivities of the civil rights workers they tracked. They jot down the license plate numbers of cars parked at civil rights meetings and peeked into bank accounts. Informants, many of them black Mississippians, reported to the Commission about plans for marches and boycotts. And actually, we would well be appalled about the context of a assassination plot or kind of a suppressive activities. For example, you see one of the plans was to put dynamite to the start of a Kenneth's Mercury. Another plan was to have some liquor planted in Kenneth's car, and then he would be arrested. So this impermissible plots and very inhumane and oppressive against the civil rights advocates and other segregation activists is against our justice, a very fundamental sense. So we consider this misfortune or sad story could be recourse in terms of a more democratic and a more adequate shield of administrative law and public policy, social justice. So you may be oriented in that concept for this class, actually. My lecture is massively based on the book titled Administrative Law and Politics, which was authored by Kristen Harrington, published in 2008. It's fourth edition, published by CQ Press, and his introduction and structure and dealings of a theme is very helpful, and particularly in a combination with important cases and edited by comments. He now actually worked as a professor of political science in New York University. So nowadays we have chances to encounter useful work through online bookstores. Have you ever experienced the a virtual source bookshelf? Of course, I'm not absolutely don't mind to sell that dealings. I do not recommend, but I have several chances to exploit that method, and I find it very convenient and serving importantly my personal needs. Then we now consider some questions. First, what self-interest reasons a corporation would have for supporting the regulatory rules? Often the regulatory rules would function against the commercial commercial profitability. They would impose some standard regulations to increase the cost. And in some cases, they would impede any price flexibility to respond with a market trend. Consider the case of Department of Energy. It proposed rules setting minimum standards for energy efficiency for home appliances, including air conditioning units. One argument for doing so was that the free market would solve the problem. The consumer would naturally buy the most efficient unit over the long run. But officials of the Carrier Corporation, a well-known manufacturer of air conditioning systems, argued that every apartment house owner and every new home builder would have only an incentive to buy the lowest priced unit, regardless of operating costs, because the tenants or buyers, not the owners or builders, would pay the energy bills. What potential weakness in the free market system does this illustrate? So the viewpoint could differ between the agencies and the private enterprises, who would finally responsible for this conflict. How to consider between the public good and increase of a national economy. Right? So all the way through, the government has to defer to the factor that could boost private interest. What do you consider the public interest should prevail? So actually, the state is an important actor in this contemporary times. For example, you see in the later cases about the very illuminating words from Justice Brennan. His concept is very interesting, that the societal members and citizens are now subsisting in terms of entitlements. So traditionally, the property, the scope of property in concept is very restrictive. What, land ownership or the possession of a tangible goods or others. That is not the case in this modern era, you see. How do you consider the social benefit, welfare benefit? That is a kind of a property right in concept and understanding the attribute, you see. So what does the concept of due process would matter with? Actually, it was created to respond with the sanctity of property, and so very subtle to see the nature of a social incidents, public incidents, occurrences. So it is one entitlement in terms of broad understanding to what attain the level of a property and others. So the deprivation, divestment of a welfare right has to be addressed in compliance with a constitutional mandate, due process concept. So the property concept is intrinsically a private or personal in earlier years, and interpersonal involving the context of private contract. In these modern times, we see it to be social and insured in ways by the exact means of a public intervention and as a matter of our view would well be proper as a matter of right, so, entitlement to social benefit. So due process has to be ensured to exercise the involved interest, to administer the involved interest. Other concept you need to be aware would be the kind of intellectual property. The concept is also approximated in ways of property concept. So some scholars would argue for in favor of quasi-property attribute about intellectual property. So you might learn the two aspects about legal interest involved in intellectual property. What is the economic aspect, the infringement of copyright laws and damages or involving civil actions? How do you the integrity of lawsuit? It is a legal interest to be shielded by the statute, intellectual property. Actually, the interrelationship between, in this case, Carrier Corporation and Department of Energy could be viewed to represent the dilemma of a modern capitalism. So very difficult about the nature of issue and controversies. So how do you consider the role and responsibility of Department of Energy? As said, the public agencies are expected to act to meet three elements: accountability, participation, and information. So, actually amenable to many possibilities of action and avenues to redress the involved interests. Who can select ultimately? And so the participatory program or process could do a fair good in this case, exploit the options and also which could lead to resolution in mutually satisfactory manner. Then it is difficult context of wisdom, I consider. How do you shape a countervailing argument against the Department of Energy in this case? Then do you see it pervasive? The carrier corporation could focus on the price of unit. So the immense concern would be given to price itself. Is that so and serve their interest? Might not be so in some other dimension. And second, reflect on the nature of power. What would the powerful have the less powerful lack? So consider the monopolist power in terms of economy, and also other actors or players. It is often said the most powerful are those who possess the most political resources. These resources include the capacity to use superior physical force on others, the capacity to cause others, high status, legitimacy, prestige, money, and finally information. How might such a power model explain how the Mississippi State Sovereign Commission got away for so long with what is dead? In terms of this power model, what qualities of acting in the name of law empower otherwise weak people and interests? So your first impression would go to the government and public agencies. And third, what justifications for robust domestic regulation does the following story support? So I've introduced the story about a Mississippi tragedy. So societies, the lawyers for the human society said when the agency relaxed the ban, it did so without really telling people that that's what they were going to do and without explaining how this compares with the obligation to protect consumers and ensure human treatment. So that is a maxim you need to consider further. And you should not neglect the reality that the profit motive in business leads some people in both competitive and non-competitive businesses to cheat. How, for example, should government respond, if it at all, to the case of the University of Central Arizona? A two-person mail order house selling a doctoral degree certificates to anyone who wanted to buy one. it is significant that some people, especially in public education, increase their potential for job advancement if they can claim a graduate degree. Or take the problem of the fraudulent sale of over-the-counter dietary supplements. Suppose I package a mixture of sugar and cornstarch dyed green in a capsule and sell it as a variable aid to reducing cholesterol levels in the blood. Can you count on an unregulated private market to discover such a fraud? Note that the fraud does not merely take a few dollars from someone under false pretenses. The consumer may forego using a product that will actually improve health by lowering blood cholesterol. So actually, it may trace to the role of to the theory of an advocate of a eminent philosopher named Van Damme. He is considered as an originator of modern public policy and administration, and maximum happiness for people. How do you consider? In this question, you may consider some narrow scope of a private law concept. It is actually a contract about education and delivery of a degree certificate. It may be permissible. How about the public aspect? The aspect of public education. We have some moralities and a paradigm about public education. Of course, in the United States, we see the federal system of government and Department of Education may garner many roles and responsibility recently. However, some basic commission still now be practiced by a regional context. For example, what is the accreditation process of North Central Association of universities and colleges, or Eastern Association, Western Association. So the regional power now administers the kind of a public problem, you see. So it could be recast beyond the narrow understanding. And also we find important roles in administering public health. As I've said, FDA, what is FDA? For Federal Drug Administration, NIH. So the concept is rather public. Between the traditional private law and also traditional public laws. Consider what the police, what a regulatory role in civilian aspect would be traditional sphere of a public law, and private law is actually notable in that context. The administrative law emerged in near century or decades, involved the kind of a middle state of a government, middle status of government, which is not exactly a private nor a public in traditional sense. They could penetrate the kind of middle plane between two spheres. So labor issues, public health, education. Let's stop here, and I'll continue on next slide.